I am a pastor, as you've heard. I pastor with Kileleshwa Covenant Community, which is a sister church within the Chapel Fraternity. But I'm also a lawyer. For my tent making, I run a law firm, Misiko Advocates. I am also an author, as you may know by now. I have recently released a book on divorce. It's called The Divorce Dilemma. It has been available. I will encourage you to read that book because we have laid out principles that help you avoid getting into that space. There are many times the danger in marriage is we take so much for granted that we end up in that other space. So I've enshrined a lot of principles in that book that will help you to avoid getting into that space. So if you have not read that book, please get yourself a copy. There are copies around. Pastor George told me they still have copies. So please get yourself a copy. They are retailing at Keswick and other places. They are selling them. I've seen they are selling them $1,400, $1,500, but I have a special author discount. Here at Karura, we are selling them only for $1,000. So get yourself a copy. You know a friend somewhere who needs to hear about this. Divorce is impacting all of us. Buy it for somebody. Give it as a gift to somebody to just help us know how to minister to people who are in that space and also to help ourselves in our own marriages. My wife Carol, Pastor Carol, she just communicated very, very strongly. Carol is a professional in the insurance industry, in the insurance sector, and in my ministry, she's my greatest asset. I say that she's my greatest supporter, but also my greatest enabler. She enables me to do things that others I would not do. So I'm very privileged to have Carol here with us. And today we are going to be speaking to you on the subject we have been asked to speak on: communication. Communication is so key, and I'm going to call Carol to take us forward. We are parents of 2 children. We have a son and a daughter. They are not here. They would not want to be here because they are teenagers. You know the teenage space. Our son is 16 years old. Our daughter is 13, going 14. So, greetings from the Misiko household this morning.
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So as Ron has said, my name is Carol, and like many of you, we have work that we do in other places, other sectors, but we love to do this together. So the topic of communication, wow, what a topic. I keep telling Ron, we need to stop doing these discussions because usually the night before we are tested on the topic. But anyway, so we stand here not because we are perfect, not because 18 years is anything special, but really by the grace of God. Yeah? That somehow we've managed to find a way, and that we are taking you along with us on the journey that we're talking. So without much further ado, the year 2020, I don't know if it shook you like the way it shook everybody. And with the onset of COVID, I think the thing that became most apparent is many of us had escape routes. You wake up in the morning and you disappear, and you come back, whether late into the night and the children have gone to school, and you only congregate for 1 or 2 hours, which you can kind of make it, isn't it? 1 or 2 hours, you can fake it a little bit. But COVID put us in a box, and we were together 24/7, 365, almost for 1 year. Couldn't leave, especially when we were on lockdown. And I think for many people, COVID then exposed the fissures in our marriage and with our family relationships, right? And most of us were put under pressure, and not just economic pressure. People lost their jobs, right? People got half salary all of a sudden. So you have economic pressures, you have health pressures, people are losing their parents, their friends, uncles, grandparents. So you had all these pressures and then you were locked together in a box. We faced several pressures from COVID-19. And that's when we realized, I actually don't know this person I'm sleeping next to. Or it's so much time has passed since we really knew each other. I actually don't know this person. And they don't know me. We all developed cabin fever. You just need to get out. There's nowhere you're going. And in many cases, conflict began to be exposed in our marriage. I don't know if that was true for you. I think we felt that tension. Around the world, that was also coming out. We get statistics from a place like South Africa, where cases of domestic violence completely escalated. And not just in South Africa, even here, domestic violence increased exponentially. But even if we put COVID aside, we live in a situation where marriage is under threat. It's under threat, not just from COVID, but from other areas. Today, it's much easier to walk out of your marriage than it has ever been. To just say, I've had enough. It's not working. And majority of the young people behind you just don't even see the value of getting married. And I think you can testify to many who say, I opt out. Not good enough for me. But today we want to talk about what God's idea of marriage was. It was God's idea for mankind, right? It was intended to be a blessing, not a curse. But as some of you have alluded to, it's not easy. It's a journey. It's not going to get easier, get better. It's a journey you must just walk through. And today we want to suggest to you that if you have the right attitude, if you have the right practices, your marriage will and can get better, and it can thrive, despite the challenges that you face. Ron and I, we've made it by 18 years. Some days we're like, whoa, how have we made it? And some days we're like, woohoo, we made it. But we're not coming here to prescribe something for you. It's not a prescription. We're not gonna come and tell you do X, Y, Z, and it's gonna fix everything. But we want to share with you things that we think can help from our experience. There is no one-size-fits-all solution in everything that we're doing or saying, but there are some biblical principles that can apply. Some things that the Bible tells us that if we choose to apply, can work. So we'll tell you what those principles are, but the application really is up to you. When it's you with your husband, with your wife, and you have some issues that you have to discuss, it's all about what you bring to the table, how you choose to apply these principles. So how are we going to walk through this today? We'll go through 3 sections. The first one, Ron will talk us through the foundations, the pillars. What are these things that hold up our marriage? And these things are true whichever phase in life that you're in, whether you've just gotten married, you've been married 18 years, you've been married 50 years. These are the pillars that will hold up your marriage. So Ron will just refresh our minds on that. And for any building to stand, just like this one, Ron and I just did a walkthrough. We were here when the idea was planted, and it was very nice to see it in action. But for any building like this to stand, it must have a foundation. It must have pillars that hold up that structure. And this is the same for your marriage. A strong foundation, the right pillars will hold your marriage up. Then the second thing we want to do is then just narrow down into this one pillar called communication. Why is communication important? We'll also just ask the question, how does it go so wrong? Like, what's the root behind a poor communicating habit? And then we'll ask the question, can we get it right? What do we need to do to get this thing, to bed down this animal called communication? And then we want to also just interact, because it's not always good to just receive information. And many times you can give us your thoughts and views that can help us. So we want to have a moment of interaction. We'll take some questions and answers and talk through this together.
We come to Karura at a time when you're in a building project. And so this is very easy for you to understand. There's a building, there's this building that we are in, and there's a construction out there. And you can see from the construction, and I know that you've been raising money. You've sunk a lot of money into that structure out there, because you are putting down the foundation. For any building to be able to stand, you've got to have the foundation. And the stronger the foundation, the better the building. And then you've got to for the structure to hold, you've got to put pillars. And you can see that I can see that you've put some metal, and then you've put concrete around it, because the building will need to stand, so that when the wind blows and the elements come, the building will be able to stand. These things here, they are not for beauty. They actually hold this structure together. It's the same for marriage. A marriage that is built on a strong foundation. Just like you've invested so many millions. Pastor Ngari we talk from time to time, and he tells me about how much you've sunk into that thing. It's ridiculous. But it's because you want a building that will stand. And it is the same for your marriage. You've got to have a good foundation. The foundation includes how well you get to know each other. During your dating time, that is the foundation. The boundaries that you set, that is part of the foundation. PMCC is part of the foundation. Those are things that you build, you invest in, and they help you. They help your marriage to stand. But then there are pillars, as you can see from that diagram that we have put there. There are pillars that will hold that structure together. And today I want to just focus on the pillars that hold marriages together. If you have this in place, your marriage will thrive. If not, you will find that you struggle. And the first pillar I want to look at is the pillar of marriage as a covenant, not a contract. A lot of people are getting into marriage thinking that marriage is a contract. And I'm a lawyer. I draft contracts for people all the time. What is the difference? A contract is premised on performance. You perform and I perform. You do something and I do something back. And if you don't do your part in a contract, then the contract is broken. It is rescinded. A covenant, on the other hand, is binding and cannot be broken. A covenant is eternal. A covenant is final, whereas a contract may be voided, may be rescinded. God's design for marriage, brothers and sisters, is that marriage is a covenant, not a contract. Your marriage is intended for a lifetime. That is pillar number one. You've got to know, you've got to understand, and you've got to treat your marriage as something that you're in for a lifetime. There is no plan B. There is no option. You're in it, and that's pillar number one. Marriage is a covenant. It is not a contract. Then pillar number two, you get into marriage understanding that every marriage is going to be challenged. And this is difficult as I interact with younger people, I realize that it's difficult. We live in a very materialistic world. A world that gives you options. If you don't feel good, if it doesn't make me feel good, then I leave it, I get out of it. That's how we treat our jobs. That's how we treat life. That's how we treat relationships. But in God's order for marriage, God's design for marriage, every marriage will be challenged. Why? Because of sin. The moment that sin entered into the world, it meant that our lives, God did not promise us a life without challenge, and our marriages will be challenged. When you're joined together with your spouse, the starting point is always the fact that you are different. You come from different backgrounds. You come from different upbringing. Sometimes you come from different tribes. You have different personalities, and so on and so forth. So the bottom line is that you're different. And so you're taking two people who are very different and bringing them together and trying to make them one, trying to make them a cohesive unit. But because of these realities of your being different, the way you do things will be different, your ideas will be different, and if you get into marriage and do not address that divide, you will find that you're pulling apart. You're constantly pulling apart from each other. It is important in a healthy marriage that every couple work together to bridge the divide. The purpose of marriage is that you become one, and you must be working on that every single day of your lives. Then pillar number 3 is the pillar of communication. And this is going to be our central area of focus today. At the core of every healthy relationship is the ability to communicate. And marriage is no exception. The ability for a couple to successfully communicate with one another is paramount. You don't communicate well, your marriage will fail. That one I can promise you, and you can take it to the bank. You must be able to communicate well. But communication is a difficult thing, particularly because of the differences that we have already alluded to. And so today we're going to be looking at healthy ways of communicating with one another in marriage. Pillar number 4 is the fact that there are roles in marriage. God in His wisdom gave to the husband certain roles, and He gave to the wife other different roles. Failure to execute one's roles, or one party straying into the other's roles, may result in conflict, may result in difficulty. So there is roles in marriage, and we must be aware of our roles. We must know our roles. We must execute our roles. Then pillar number 5 is, because of those differences, conflict will come. How do we handle those conflicts? That is another pillar. That's another structural aspect that will hold your marriage and keep it from falling. Whenever human beings live together, there's going to be conflict. And marriage is not spared from that reality. Conflict in and of itself is not a bad thing. But if you handle conflict wrongly, this can be the ultimate thing that devastates your marriage. It is the duty of every couple to find healthy ways of dealing with conflict. So critical, so important. Pillar number 6 is that there are other people, outsiders, who have a vested interest in your marriage. There are in-laws, there are relatives, there are friends, there are associations. How should we as a couple relate with these outsiders? Because you must relate with people. You must relate with you don't stop being a daughter because you're married. You're somebody's daughter, even when you're married. You're somebody's son. How do you as a couple then relate with these other people? What are the boundaries? And this is another key area that every marriage has to grapple with. And by the grace of God, you must find a balance if you are going to succeed in your marriage. The seventh pillar is the pillar of finances. And this is a huge elephant in the room for many marriages because people don't talk about it. You get married and you have your money, and she comes and she has her money, and you continue dealing with it like her money and your money. One of my mentors, John Nganga, normally says that a husband cannot surprise a wife by buying them a car. John Nganga says that. And I agree with him. Because John Nganga says, where will you get that money to surprise your wife with a car? Because that money is her money. You have stolen her money to surprise her with a car. So finances is something that we must deal with, and we must derive the right principles and the right way of handling family finances. Then the eighth pillar is the pillar of sexual intimacy. And sex was given to man by God. It is actually a gift that is to be enjoyed within the confines of marriage. Handled correctly, you find that this area of marriage impacts every other area of your marriage. And so that is a pillar. That is another pillar that holds your marriage together. Then the ninth pillar is the pillar of children. And I want to say that children are a blessing from the Lord, but many couples find that children come before they've established a good ground on one or all of these pillars that we have highlighted. And if you haven't established the core of a harmonious and healthy existence that will enable both spouses to flourish, the introduction of children into the family serves to widen the wedge between a couple. So you've got to work on your unity, on your oneness, so that by the time children come, you're only building on that. And you will say to me, I find myself in a situation where, the situation you're describing, where my husband and I have not worked on our compatibility. My spouse and I have not worked on our compatibility, but the children are here. What do? There is hope. You can build. You can correct those things. It is possible for you to get back to correct practices. The lack of children also can lead to very serious marital discord if you have not established the right foundation. We are African, and in Africa, a marriage, the success of a marriage is interpreted through children. When children don't come, it can be challenging. But biblically, a family is husband and wife. Husband and wife are actually a complete family unit. Children are a bonus. They're an added bonus to the family. But that is something that you've got to know. That is something that you've got to understand, so that you're not putting unnecessary pressures on each other.
I think in terms of the pillars that he's talked about, communication is the pillar, I think, that greases the wheels, that enables you to get through all of those challenges he's talking about. So we want to turn to, what does the Bible say about communication? And if you can, I'll put it on the screen, but I'll also read from Genesis 11, chapter 1 to 9. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there, but you can also read it on the screen. And this is the section that talks about the Tower of Babel. Now the whole world had one language and one common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people, speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from where they were over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now, as I read that, I think the thing that stood out so clearly to me was the incredible potential and power of communication. Think about it. The people at that time were in a state of rebellion against God. They attempted to build a tower that would reach unto the heavens. And God himself had to come down and say, hey, unless I do something, these guys will actually accomplish it. What did God do to prevent them? We know he had the power to send a flood. We know he had the power to destroy the city. But rather than sending an earthquake or a plague, he chose to ruin their ability to communicate. Let me repeat that. He chose to ruin their ability to communicate. God knew that communication was foundational to their ability to get anything done. It's very profound. I remember reading this story as a child, and it never quite clicked to me until Ron and I started doing research and reviewing this. Man was going to accomplish the incredible, I dare say the impossible, because they were able to communicate. You can imagine how powerful this truth is when we discover it and decide to implement it in our marriages. Just think about that. Communication is absolutely vital to our existence as human beings. And God desires for us to communicate with each other in a way that solves problems and builds relationships and brings glory to him. Just picture in your mind, people were able to communicate and decide to build a tower to heaven. What is possible? What is possible when you're able to communicate? So Ron now will, having given me the legal part to do, I'm going to give him the part to break down a teaching from scripture about what does communication, God-led communication, what does that look like?
I honestly believe that if God had not scattered mankind at Babel, they would have reached the heavens. They dared to do the impossible. And the thing that was enabling them to do that was the fact that they were in constant communication with one another. The communication was effective. It was a powerful tool. And as Carol has pointed out, if we discover that tool and implement it in our marriages, what powerful marriages we will have. What steady marriages we will have. As a person who deals a lot in the divorce space, I talk to couples, and many times the marriage starts going down because the communication has been broken. So I want to ask the question, what is the basic purpose of communication? Why is it so powerful? Why is it so important? One of the most significant purposes of communication is to solve problems. Now, every marriage will go through problems. How do you solve your marriage? How do you solve the problems in your marriage? You solve your problems through communication. So, communications helps us to solve problems, but it also helps us to build relationships. In marriage, communication is the single greatest factor in working through problems. It is the single greatest factor in building and strengthening your marriage relationship. You know, I would even dare say that this is probably one of the most important aspects of a marriage. You can't have a marriage without communication. When communication breaks down, that marriage is broken. It is actually sick, it's in the ICU, it's headed for destruction. I've had individuals going through divorce confess to me many times that they have found themselves talking to their spouse much more during the divorce period than they did during their marriages. And that is true, because you're forced, because now of the process, the court wants you to do certain things. You're forced to communicate more during divorce than you ever did during the marriage. And I strongly suspect that if they had kept their communication going, they would not have found themselves in that situation of divorce. Communication not only builds relationships, but it helps to solve problems within the relationship. There is so much frustration in our homes, in our families, because of a failure to adequately communicate. I've heard young people say to me, I'm a father of teenagers, and I've heard young people many times say that my parents won't talk to me. My parents don't understand me. Those of you who are parents here today, it isn't our impression of how much we are communicating with our children that matters. Rather, it is their perception that counts. A wise parent will not merely rely on spanking and grounding and other forms of punishment, laying down rules, but a wise parent will know how to grab a child's emotions in a heart-to-heart conversation. And you'll find that a lot more is achieved when you do that. Therefore, I want to suggest to you that one of the greatest family crises that can develop is what I call a communication shutdown. All other crises inevitably erupt from it. When you're not communicating, your finances will be in trouble. When you're not communicating with your spouse, in-laws will be in trouble because there'll be a lot of misunderstanding. Why did you go to your mother's house when we were supposed to go to this and this other place? You're not communicating. And so it is trickling into other areas of your marriage. Once communication has shut down, it is often painful. It is often difficult to get it restarted. And when it is restarted, it will often begin with a conflict that causes people to run away instead of staying with it. Anytime there is a problem, the solution is not less communication. Rather, the solution is more communication. Are you in trouble in your marriage? Is there a problem? That's not the time for you to communicate less. That's not the time for you to go to kneel by mouth. And there are people who are very good at it. Kneel by mouth is a weapon. It's a weapon in our marriages. But when you are in trouble, that's not the time for kneel by mouth, for silent treatment. It is the time for you to communicate more. Because communication will open doors to solutions. The problem will not work out if you just walk away. It has been said that communication is to a relationship what blood is to the body. As the blood flows through the body, carrying out impurities and bringing fresh cells and life, so communication regularly carries out the impurities of a relationship and causes the whole relationship to be fresh. It causes the relationship to be new. It causes the relationship to be alive. We really cannot overemphasize the importance of communication, my friends. Particularly in marriage. And unfortunately, most people do not build up this area. We ignore this area. We focus on other areas and ignore what is the most critical part of a marriage. Because you talk a lot, some imagine that you're communicating a lot. Communication is not talking. You know, in my family, those of you who know me know that I'm an extrovert. And on the scale of extrovertedness, I am 14-0. I am right at the extreme of extrovertedness. My wife, on the other hand, is an introvert. And she's on the other extreme, 14-0 of introvertedness. So when we started out, we ran into trouble. Because I'm always talking.
You're not communicating.
I'm always talking. We go to bed and I'm talking. She comes home and I'm talking. And her, on the other hand, she just needed time she has been around people and she just needs time to just regain herself. But here's a husband who's talking. And then our son, our firstborn child came and he took my personality. Extrovert. So she comes home, her husband is talking, and her son is talking. Then our second child came. Poor Carol. Because again, our second child is an extrovert. So poor Carol comes home and there are 3 people. Many times she comes and she finds the house quiet. But as soon as she walks in, everybody starts talking. The danger with talking, people imagine that because you talk a lot, you're communicating. There's very little communication that was happening, yet we were talking a lot. And so you've got to establish the right patterns of communication. Talking a lot does not mean you're communicating, because communication is not passive, it is active. There are various faculties of the human system that must be actively engaged for effective communication to happen. Not just the mouth. Okay? And I want to look at some of those faculties that are involved every time you communicate. And the first one is the tongue. The tongue is actively involved in any communication that we make. So, Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 says, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." You can see the power of the tongue. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 4 says, "The soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit." Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 19 says, "Sin is not intended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues." Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 3 says, "Those who control their tongue will have a long life." Look at that. Those who control, you want to live long? The Bible is telling us, those who control their tongue will have a long life. Opening your mouth can ruin everything. So the first element, the first faculty of you as a person, of your persona, involved in communication is the tongue. But Proverbs is telling us that we must be wise in how we use our tongues. And particularly in a marriage situation, we must be very, very wise in in how we apply our tongue. The second faculty of the human being that is involved and engaged in communication is the heart. And Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 28 says, "The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil." Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 23 says, "The hearts of the wise make their mouths prudent, and their lips promote instruction." You know, the heart is such a critical faculty because it is everything that you have allowed to store in your heart, to process in your heart. That's what comes out. So really the engine of effective communication is your heart. What are you feeding your heart with? What are you allowing your heart to process? Because there's another scripture that says, out of the heart, out of the intentions of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what are you doing with your heart? For you to be an effective communicator in your marriage, you've got to guard your heart. You've got to be constantly watching your heart. What are you allowing your heart to process about your spouse, about the situation, about your marriage situation? Guard your heart. The third faculty involved in the process of communication is the ears. Not only do we speak, but in communication we also hear, we listen. So Proverbs 15:31 says, "Whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home among the wise." Proverbs 19:20 says, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." Proverbs 18:15 says, "The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out." For effective communication, you must not just be the one talking. Earlier in our marriage, Carol came home and I wanted to communicate. So I was just talking, just yapping all the time. But I was killing this lady. Over time, I've had to learn how to listen. Sometimes it's just enough for you to step back and ask your spouse, "How are you doing? How are you? How's your day?" And listen. Listen to what they have to say. And the fourth and final faculty that I will address for today, that is involved in effective communication, is the mind. The mind. So it's not just about feelings, but it's also about processing and thinking and determining what is right and what is wrong. So the mind is engaged. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 2 says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions." Proverbs chapter 12 verse 16 says, "Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult." For you to be able to just take it on the chin when your spouse has said something that is inappropriate, it takes the mind. It takes you to process. It takes you to understand that's not who she is. That's not what the intention is not for her to crush me. It takes the mind to see that. Proverbs 17 verse 9 says, "Whoever would foster love covers over an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends." It is something that you will process in your mind and you will determine that this one, I didn't like it, but I will not pursue it because there's no value in pursuing it. That is part of communication. But the second thing I want to say to you today is that communicators tell us that when we speak, we use three modes of communication. And we use those modes of communication to a certain degree. The content, right now I'm speaking and you're listening to me. The content of what I'm saying accounts for only 7% of what you're going to hear today. Only 7%. I've prepared and we've prepared this wonderful presentation, but the content is only 7% of what you receive. The tone, and you notice I'm really trying hard to keep my tone moving, because the tone accounts for 38%. Have you ever seen a person telling the other, I love you, and then I love you? What have I said? What have you said? The tone accounts for 38%. And then there's the non-verbal aspect of communication, and this accounts for 55%. So I could have the right content. I'm saying all the right things. I'm using the right tone. But my non-verbal communication is saying a whole different thing altogether. Just earlier on when we were doing the introductions and Pastor Edna introduced my wife as Pastor Carol, and I called her Pastor Carol, you know what she did? She rolled her eyes. Ladies are very good at that. Every time my daughter has been trying to teach me how to roll my eyes, but I end up rolling my head instead. I don't know how they do it. Now, that rolling of the eyes is communication. And it doesn't matter what the other person is saying to you. When you roll your eyes, it accounts for 55%. That conversation is probably going nowhere. Because just that rolling of the eyes has said way more than you are ever going to say. So the non-verbal, be careful about the non-verbal aspects of your communication. It has been said that communication takes place at 5 different levels. Now, every time you communicate, you are operating at either any of these 5 levels. The first level is what we call courtesy. And we exercise this every day with strangers. When we drove in today, we met the security guard, and she came to us and she said, "Good morning." And we said, "Good morning" back. It's the level of courtesy. You express it with strangers. You say please, you say thank you. And that's the most basic level of communication. Unfortunately, in our culture, even that basic level of communication is being eroded, so that we don't even know how to be courteous with each other. Okay? But communication has got to grow from that level of courtesy that you exercise with strangers to the second level, which is now the level of detail. And that's where now you are with the security guard. This morning, we went on to ask her, "We are so and so, and we've come for this and this meeting. Where is it being held?" We are getting into some level of detail. That's why you say, "Pastor Edna called. Would you call her back?" Now you're getting into a level of some kind of detail. And I like to call this the transactional level of communication. Now you are beginning to transact. You've moved beyond courtesy and you're beginning to transact. And then that level has got to grow in a marriage. It's got to grow to the third level, level 3, where now you get into thoughts and ideas. You begin discussing your thoughts. You're getting safe. You're feeling safer, because now you know this is not a stranger. This is somebody I can begin to interact with. I can begin to share I like to call that level the level of opinions. Now you're feeling free to let your opinions be known by the other party. This is where you talk about school. Which school should our children go to? You begin to talk about housing. Where should we live? No? you're still not at the highest level of communication, but your communication is growing. It's moving. It's going in the right direction. Then there is level 4. You grow from that level to the next level, which is the level of feelings. Now you are able to be more vulnerable with your spouse. Now you can let your feelings to begin to come out. And that's where your spouse comes home and says, today at work, I had a really bad day. There's this boss of mine called Pastor Edna. Many people miss that. That's where now you're telling your spouse, this is what happened. And I feel quite discouraged. Now you're letting your feelings, you're exposing your feelings to your spouse. But you've got to be safe. You've got to be secure for you to express your feelings. Do you know a lot of couples are walking around with bottled feelings because they can't express them to their spouse. They're not secure enough to let their feelings be known by their spouses. And level 4 leads on to level 5, which is now the deepest hopes, the deepest fears, the deepest longings. And that's where now you're telling your spouse, I've never shared this with you before, and I know it sounds silly, but I really want to share it with you. And you go on to disclose your deepest, your deep-seated feelings. This is, I like to call this the naked and unashamed. In Genesis chapter 2, the Bible says that at creation, as God created Adam and Eve, the man and woman were naked, but they felt no shame. You're now open. And I want to suggest to you, brothers and sisters, that the God's desire is that our communication in our marriage gets to that ultimate level. At creation, at Eden, God created a marriage where the couple were naked and unashamed. And that has got to be the goal. That has got to be your goal in your own marriage. All these 5 levels are important. Each one of these levels has their place. Level 1 and level 2 need a lot of time, but they're the ones that clear the way for level 3, level 4, and level 5. So don't try to jump to level 5 without first exercising level 1. You've got to start at the level of courtesy. Then you've got to have conversations on transactions, because you're an institution. You've got to work together. You've got to plan together. You've got to do things together. And for that to happen, you've got to have opinions, and those opinions have got to be expressed. And that way, step by step, you grow to a level where, as a couple, you're naked and unashamed. Most casual male relationships, Alex, I'm sorry to tell you, but most of your boys, you guy, my guy, those relationships are at level 3. Men operate at level 3. It's just opinions. They like to. It's all about opinions, and who has the better car, and who is better at golf, and who is, that's where most casual male relationships operate. When men can get beyond level 3, it is very special. And Zach and I are past level 3. So it's very special. we talk a lot. We talk about our children. We talk about our wives. We talk about many things. We talk about retirement. We started talking about retirement. Can you believe it? Just the other day we were young men, but we're talking about retirement now. So when male relationships can go beyond that, it's very special. Most female relationships, women are better than us in communication, but most female relationships operate at level 4. Where the feelings, ladies somehow have a way of sharing their feelings. And that's why they live longer than us, because they're less burdened. Men go to the grave with a lot of burdens because they can't talk about them. How do I tell anyone about this? But in your marriage, remember, the goal is to get to level 5. But unfortunately, statistics show that many marriages settle at level 2. And that's why we are having so much trouble in marriage. Because a marriage cannot be operating lower than the relationship you have with your boys. A marriage cannot be operating, your marriage cannot be operating lower than the level you're having with your girls, your friends at the chama. You're having better communication with them than with your spouse. And the question I want to ask you today is, what level characterizes your marriage? Think about it. If your spouse is here, look at each other and ask, what level are we operating at? I'm not trying to start trouble here. That's not my intention. If your spouse is not here, fair enough. Think about it. But you want to know where you are, and you want to know what the possibilities are, so that when you get back, please be working to get your communication to grow. The question is, are you satisfied with the level that you're operating in? And how can you grow to deeper levels? Ephesians chapter 4 and verse number 29 says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." That is the NIV. I like how the NLT puts it, because the NLT says, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. The Apostle Paul here is warning us about the use of improper language in our communication. In verse number 30, he goes on to say, do not grieve the Holy Spirit. Because, brothers and sisters, it is possible for us to grieve the Holy Spirit by the way we live, and by the way we speak, by the way we communicate with others. Are you bringing sorrow to the Holy Spirit? Are you bringing sorrow to God? Or are you pleasing God in the way that you communicate with your spouse and with other people? The author Larry Crabb says that whenever the goal of our behavior is essentially to change the other person, whether the change is good or bad, we are wrong. Unless our primary goal is for his or her welfare, then those words are useless. And though they appear to bring change in the short term, they serve no eternal purpose and will decay. What Larry Crabb is essentially saying, he's warning us, he's cautioning us about the mistake that many of us make. We get into marriage and we set out on our mission to change our spouse. And Crabb is saying that whenever the goal of our behavior is to change the other person, whether that change is good or bad, it is wrong. It is not for you to change your spouse. Rather, the primary goal is for their welfare. You look out for their welfare and the positive change will come. Look out for their good and change will come. There is something you don't like about them. Look out for their interest, and positive change is going to come.
The second tip that I want to talk about, and this one I think I got very personally convicted on, is listening with your entire being. As Ron has said, I'm an introvert to the nth degree, and I have a house full of people who are constantly talking. So it's very easy to just get into the mode of, As people are just talking, it's coming and the information is too much. But Isaiah 55, 2-3 says, "Hearken diligently unto me. Incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live." That word hearken, it's a very old school word. But what does it really mean? Ron tells me it's derived from the Hebrew word shama. Means listen intelligently. To pay attention. Not just And this is distinct from the simple phrase of just hearing. It's called listening on purpose. Incline your ear is from the Hebrew word nata, and it means stretch or bend. So it implies you're doing something to cause yourself to yield. And when we listen, we need to do it on purpose. We need to do it intelligently and with our entire being. I think social media has robbed us of so much. And then as women also, we have this thing of being able to multitask. So I know there are moments when I'm having to do a report, especially during COVID. You're typing, doing a report, and I tell my son, I'm listening, just keep talking, but don't be distracted by my typing. I'm actually listening to you. Yeah? Or you're flipping through Twitter on your phone and you tell somebody, I'm with you, just keep talking. But remember what Ron talked about, what researchers say, that only 7% of the total message comes through content, actual words. So when I'm sitting here and I'm telling my son, I'm listening to you, I'm not looking at him, and I'm typing, I'm only getting 7% of what he's actually telling me. Inflection and tone of the voice makes up 38, and then body language and facial expression makes up 55%. Just think about it. How do you listen to your spouse? Think back to the last conversation you had, the last serious conversation that you had. Was it eye-to-eye contact, TV off, radio off, phones down, face down, and just looking at your spouse and talking? What did she look like? How was her body language? What did he look like? How was he feeling? What was his tone? If you're not really paying attention when your spouse or your child is talking to you, if you're hearing words but not looking at them, not really listening for the unspoken, you'll only get a small percentage. You only get a small percentage. Those rolling of the eyes, okay, I'm sorry. Are you really sorry? Yeah? If you only listen but don't pay attention, you're missing out on a vital part of the communication.
Tip number 3 is watch for opportunities to honor and affirm your spouse and your children. There are always opportunities presenting themselves. Opportunities to honor the other party. Psalm 147 verse 1 says, praise is delightful. Praise is something delightful. It is fitting. This is really, we are speaking about affirmation. You know, affirmation plays a vital role in all marriages. There's no human being who does not want to be affirmed. Think of affirmation as a type of relationship glue that will help two people to create a deeper bond. You've got to be affirming your children. I see it with my children every day. When we drive to school and I affirm them, I find that their day is just different because they're being affirmed by dad. And my wife as well. When I affirm her, affirmation works wonders. It's a relationship glue that will help you to create a deeper bond. The emotional closeness that you and your spouse share arises in part from your ability to affirm and to validate one another. If you're going to be growing closer and closer, it will be as you constantly appreciate and affirm each other. When you don't do that, inevitably you will just be pulling apart. And over a period of time, you'll be asking yourself, Carol and I run a course for people in troubled marriages. We call it the marriage coach. And we in session 1, we answer the question, how did we get here? How did we end up here? And for many people, they sit, they reflect, and they have told us that, we've just been drifting apart without knowing because there is no affirmation. You're just not recognizing the value of the other person. You're not telling them how valuable they are to you. Psychologists tell us that affirmation is used to reprogram the subconscious mind, to encourage us to believe certain things about ourselves or about the world and our place within it. Affirmation goes beyond what you see. It goes into the subconscious. It tells this person that they are valued, even when everything else is telling them a different story. It tells this person that they are good, that they are able to overcome, even when the circumstances are saying exactly the opposite. An abused spouse who is always being told how useless they are will inevitably live life believing that they are useless. And it affects their work, it affects everything they do. It affects their relationships. It affects who they become. I've encountered many people in the counseling room who could not do anything meaningful because they had believed the lie that they were just no good. On the other hand, a spouse who's affirmed responds very differently. They tend to be confident. They're confident in themselves. They're confident in what they do. They tend to be a person who is out there to get life and everything that it brings to them. Let us learn to affirm our spouse. Let us learn to affirm our children.
The next tip we want to give you is about being intentional about communicating. Now let me just take a small segue here. Ron and I are firmly in the 4th floor, peering into the 5th floor. And when I think at how I was when we got married 18 years ago, I think about who I was then and who I am now. I think we are two different people. Like, I've evolved and changed. The things that were important to me, the things that used to stress me, the things that used to shape me are completely different. Things I'm interested in are very different. Now, if you're not intentional about sitting together and learning and communicating, honestly, you will wake up and not only will you be a stranger to each other, many times you'll even be a stranger to yourself. You will not have somebody to reflect back to you how you have changed, for the good or for the bad. And so the 4th tip we're giving you here is be intentional. plan times and settings where it's just the two of you rediscovering yourselves, rediscovering who you are. And Ron and I have tried to be faithful about this, not very successfully, but having a date night. And here it's not going out to dance or whatever, but a time where you say, children aside, work aside, not talking about work, not talking about the transactional things, let's talk about you. What's happening with you? It doesn't come naturally, let me tell you. And the first time we tried to do it, we were like, okay, if we can't talk about the children, we can't talk about what are we talking about? For real, what is there to talk about? It was quite awkward. And it's something you just have to be intentional to do. People change. How are you changing? What are your priorities? In fact, there was one conversation where Ron just told me, I think I'm in midlife crisis. And my midlife crisis is looking like this. So we talked about it. It's like, I'm going to now wear these types of clothes. I'd like to start doing this. And we just talk about it. And it's okay. It's okay. And I've warned him also that mine is coming. Yeah. So you need to bring that deliberate force to talk about what's happening. And your spouse needs it because it brings them a feeling of intimacy, closeness, and oneness. Let me talk as a wife. Husbands, when you cut off communication from your wife, when you don't allow your wife to speak about her feelings because it's uncomfortable, because you don't know what to do with tears. And so what do? You just block it off. What you're doing is you're simply just refusing to listen. You're cutting her off as a person. Cutting her off at the knees. And you're starting a destructive and a dangerous process that will make her feel more like an object than as a person of value, than as a person whom you love. And sometimes it may not be deliberate. You might be stressed, things might be going on. It might just be the season. But don't allow that to be the way that you operate. And wives, let me speak as a wife. I think for me, when Ron was talking about all those faculties, the one that struck me is the tongue, how we use our tongues. And many times, when we're not talking about conflict situations now, but many times in a conflict, as a wife, you know where the low blow is, isn't it? You know where it will hurt the most. And many times you're like, should I? Should I not? Should I? Should I not? I'm going to do it. And you say. And words come out destructive, to destroy, to cut down. So we need to be careful. Parents also. We need to make time to communicate with our children and really communicate. And it starts when they are young. We now have teenagers. And I'm so grateful for some of the time that we invested when they were young. Because now the types of conversations we're having, I remember calling my older sister to tell her, this adulting thing, it's too difficult. I'm having conversations with my 16-year-old that are so difficult, but they are important. And if I'm not building that muscle with my husband as we're growing up in our marriage, how will you have that muscle when you're growing up, when you're talking with your grown-up children? The older your children get, the more important this becomes. Too often as children enter the teens, communication between your parent and your child diminishes. And ideally it should be the other way. So be deliberate about communication. Plan times and settings. Life is busy. Life is hectic. We're being pulled apart. Everybody wants our attention. Plan your time for communication. Do it as a family. Do it as spouses for each other.
Just one final tip, and I think we will have fulfilled our burden, Zach. Watch for and accept God-given opportunities. there are always God-given opportunities that come for you to enhance your relationship. They come all the time. And many times a crisis is always an opportunity. If there's a lesson that I'm trying to communicate to my children, that every what's that saying? Every dark cloud has a silver lining, That's a message that I'm really trying to pass along to my children. So look for God-given opportunities. This is universally true. We've just gone through an election as a country. But I firmly believe that because of the election and the crisis thereof, there's an opportunity for this country. And the question is, are we going to take that opportunity or are we going to miss it again? In marriage, there are God-given opportunities. They come every day. Take those opportunities to build your spouse, to build your communication, to build each other up. As parents also, it's easy to feel that you're too busy to take time out of the day to communicate with your children. But we need to realize that God sends opportunities that we must take advantage of. My wife and I have this thing, we alternate dropping and picking up our kids. If she drops, I will pick. If she picks, I will drop. We try to do it that way. There are some days when I'm not able to drop or pick and she does it. There are days when she's not able to do it and I do it. So we found that when we're with our children, our son is not a morning person. So on the way to school, he'll usually be very quiet. Our daughter is the opposite. In the morning, she is just, she's alive, she's bright, and she's letting it all out. The reverse is true. On the way back home, our daughter is now quiet, she's spent, and the guy is now, that's the time he's telling you everything. All of it comes out during the drive home. So, what have we learned from these moments? These moments are opportunities to talk and to build relationships. This is when you hear about, there are certain things that you hear, you just catch a point and you file it away and you know that there's something there. There's something there that I need to take it up. And as parents, we will talk about it and we'll follow it up in a different way. But take those moments that God brings your way. And those moments, be on the lookout for God moments for you to enhance your communication, for you to build each other up. Too often parents tell their children and their spouses that they're too busy right now or are too self-absorbed to notice the everyday opportunities for communication that God sends our way. But my message to you today is, even today, be on the lookout for God moments for you to minister, for you to speak, for you to enhance, for you to build your spouse, and for you to build your children.